Anna Collins, a 12-year-old with chestnut hair framing her freckled face, sat nervously on the witness stand. Her fingers tightly gripped the leash of her German shepherd, Charlie, who sat upright by her side, his amber eyes scanning the room with unwavering focus. The courtroom was packed, the tension palpable as sunlight spilled through the tall windows, reflecting off the polished wooden floor. The hushed murmurs of the crowd faded into silence as the judge, a dignified woman with a steel-gray bun and piercing eyes, called for order. Everyone was there to witness a pivotal moment, but nobody expected what was to come. The man sitting at the defendant's table was Robert, Anna's uncle. Once a trusted figure in her life, his face now showed a pale, uneasy expression as his lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. Robert avoided Anna's gaze, his trembling hands betraying his outward composure. The prosecution had painted a grim picture of his actions, but it was Anna's testimony that could seal his fate. She was the only one brave enough to speak, but the weight of her words seemed to press down on her shoulders, making her small frame appear even smaller. Charlie, sensing her hesitation, leaned against her leg, his presence a silent promise of protection. As the prosecutor began questioning her, Anna's voice wavered. She recounted memories, each one peeling back the layers of a dark past she had tried to bury. Her words painted vivid images, moments that seemed mundane but held sinister undertones. The courtroom hung on her every word, the atmosphere thick with emotion. The judge's stern gaze never left Anna, as if willing her to continue. Even the jurors leaned forward slightly in their chairs, captivated by the quiet strength of this young girl. Then came a moment of hesitation. The prosecutor's question lingered in the air, and Anna's eyes darted to Charlie. The dog's ears perked up, his body stiffening as if he understood the unspoken turmoil in her mind. Anna's fingers tightened on his leash as she mouthed a nearly inaudible word, a command only Charlie could hear. Instantly, the German shepherd stood and strode confidently across the courtroom, his nails clicking against the wooden floor. He stopped directly in front of Robert and let out a sharp, deliberate bark that echoed through the silent room. The reaction was immediate. Gasps rippled through the crowd as heads turned toward Robert, whose face had turned ashen. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his carefully constructed facade beginning to crack under the weight of Charlie's unwavering focus. The prosecutor paused, his expression a mix of surprise and intrigue, while the judge rapped her gavel firmly, demanding order. Anna remained still, her heart pounding as she watched her uncle squirm under the intensity of the moment. Charlie returned to her side, his tail wagging slightly, as if signaling that justice was now on her side. The courtroom buzzed with speculation as the judge called for a recess. What had just transpired was unlike anything the court had seen before. The connection between Anna and Charlie, their silent exchange, left everyone in awe. As Anna gently stroked Charlie's head, her resolve hardened. This was only the beginning. The truth that had haunted her for so long was finally beginning to surface, and she knew that neither she nor Charlie would stop until it was fully revealed. The courtroom was quieter now, the echoes of the dramatic moment still lingering in the air. Anna sat on the bench outside the courtroom doors, her small hand resting on Charlie's thick fur. She could feel the steady rise and fall of his chest, a rhythm that helped calm the storm of emotions swirling inside her. People bustled around her, lawyers in hurried conversations, reporters whispering into their phones, but it all felt distant. Her mind was locked on one question: what would happen next? Robert remained inside the courtroom with his attorney. Behind closed doors, his pale face and trembling hands betrayed the turmoil within. He hadn't said a word since Charlie's unexpected display. The German shepherd's single, pointed bark had felt like an accusation, and everyone had noticed his visible reaction. Now, as the judge deliberated, even Robert's lawyer seemed to be grasping at straws to salvage his defense. The air around him felt heavy, as if the walls were closing in. Anna's thoughts drifted to her mother, who sat a few seats away, her face a mix of worry and relief. This trial was never supposed to happen. For years, Anna had kept quiet, thinking no one would believe her, thinking it was better to forget. But Charlie had been her strength, her confidant. He was more than a dog. He was the one who had seen it all and never judged her. Now, sitting by her side, his quiet presence reminded her why she had come forward. The courtroom doors creaked open, and the prosecutor stepped out, his sharp gaze searching for Anna. He knelt in front of her, lowering his voice to a tone meant only for her ears. "Anna, you did great in there, but we need to talk about what happens next." His words were kind, but they carried the weight of what was at stake. "There's a chance Robert's defense might try to discredit you. They'll question everything, the signal you gave to Charlie, your testimony, even your memory. Are you ready for that?" Anna hesitated, looking down at her hands. Doubt crept into her mind, whispering that maybe she wasn't strong enough for this. But then she felt Charlie press against her leg, his warm presence grounding her. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. As the prosecutor walked back into the courtroom, Anna leaned down to whisper to Charlie, "We've got this, right?" The dog looked up at her with his intelligent, amber eyes, as if to say he'd never let her face this alone. The sound of the judge's gavel echoed from inside, signaling the trial's resumption. Anna stood, clutching Charlie's leash, and walked toward the doors. She didn't know exactly what the next moments would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to back down. Anna stepped through the courtroom doors, her heart pounding as she adjusted her grip on Charlie's leash. The quiet tension in the room thickened the air as her eyes swept across the faces of the jury, the judge, and the crowded gallery. Charlie walked beside her, his movements precise and deliberate, exuding a calm that belied the storm brewing within the room. At the defendant's table, Robert sat hunched, his pale complexion betraying the mounting pressure that seemed to be crushing him. For Anna, this moment felt monumental, like the weight of her entire world rested on what would unfold next. The prosecutor resumed his line of questioning, his voice steady as he guided Anna through her testimony. Each word she spoke seemed to carve away at the veil of silence that had once cloaked her family's darkest truths. The memories she described, fleeting moments, gestures, and conversations, carried a clarity that felt almost haunting. The jurors leaned forward, their expressions a mix of concern and fascination, as they absorbed every detail. Even the judge, typically reserved, seemed unusually attentive, her sharp gaze fixed on Anna. Charlie's presence remained a constant reassurance. Every time Anna's voice wavered or she hesitated, the German shepherd would shift slightly, brushing against her leg or looking up at her with those wise, amber eyes. His silent support strengthened her resolve. The spectators in the courtroom couldn't help but notice the bond between the girl and her dog. To them, Charlie was more than a companion. He was a pillar of strength, as much a part of Anna's testimony as the words she spoke. When the defense attorney took the floor, his strategy became clear. His questions were sharp, designed to sow doubt and undermine Anna's credibility. He questioned the reliability of her memories, suggesting that time and emotion had distorted them. He even attempted to portray Charlie's actions as coincidental, painting the dog's bark as little more than instinct rather than intention. The line of questioning cast a shadow of uncertainty across the room, and Anna felt her confidence waver. But as the attorney pressed on, Charlie leaned closer, his steady presence grounding her once again. Drawing a deep breath, Anna met the attorney's gaze. "I remember everything clearly," she said, her voice firm and resolute. Her words silenced the room, her conviction cutting through the lingering doubt. The prosecutor, seizing the moment, presented a photograph, a grainy, faded image that Anna had once kept hidden. It depicted a younger Robert in the background, his expression shadowed and ominous, while Charlie stood protectively beside a younger Anna. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the image circulated, and Robert's discomfort became impossible to ignore. He shifted in his seat, his face ashen, while his hands shook visibly. The judge's gavel struck sharply, calling the courtroom back to order. As Anna looked down at Charlie, she felt a surge of determination. This was no longer just about her past. It was about uncovering the truth and ensuring that justice was served. With Charlie by her side, she knew she had the strength to face whatever came next. The courtroom atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Anna, seated firmly in the witness chair, felt the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. Charlie remained by her side, his ears perked and his amber eyes scanning the room as if he understood every nuance of what was happening. Though the prosecutor's questioning had exposed unsettling truths, Anna knew this chapter of the trial was far from over. Robert's defense attorney rose again, his tone sharper now, his strategy desperate yet calculated. "Ms. Collins," he began, his voice cutting through the silence. "You've provided your recollection, but memories are fragile things, especially over time. Isn't it possible that what you've told this courtroom has been colored by emotion?" The question lingered, its weight shifting toward doubt, and Anna froze for a moment. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her, the tension thickening like a fog. But just as panic began to creep in, Charlie nudged her hand. Anna looked down at him, his steady presence grounding her again. With a deep breath, she found her voice. "Emotion doesn't change what I know. It doesn't change what I saw," Anna said firmly, meeting the defense attorney's gaze with unexpected defiance. The room grew still, captivated by her unwavering tone. The defense attorney pressed on, but Anna's confidence had grown stronger. Her answers were clear and concise, her recollections unshaken. Charlie's calm demeanor beside her added weight to her words, as if his very presence validated her testimony. Even the jurors, some of whom had shown skepticism earlier, now seemed invested in Anna's account. Robert, seated at the defense table, appeared increasingly restless. His once carefully crafted appearance was unraveling. A bead of sweat dripped from his brow as his hands fidgeted with the edge of his suit jacket. Then came a pivotal moment. The prosecutor introduced a new piece of evidence, a journal Anna had kept hidden for years. The journal contained notes and sketches that detailed events she hadn't spoken of aloud. Its pages held the essence of her memories, moments that Charlie had witnessed alongside her. As the prosecutor read an excerpt aloud, the courtroom fell silent again. Anna's words from years ago carried a rawness that struck the room deeply, painting a picture of fear, resilience, and the undeniable bond between her and Charlie. Robert's composure cracked further. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face pale, as the prosecutor's voice echoed in the room. The judge's stern gaze bore down on him, her expression unreadable but intense. Charlie's eyes remained fixed on Robert, his steady presence mirroring the unyielding resolve of his young owner. Anna felt the tension in the room peak, the weight of the truth pressing hard against the fragile walls of Robert's defense. She knew the trial was still far from over, but she also knew this moment marked a turning point. With Charlie's support, Anna was determined to see it through, no matter how painful the journey ahead might be. Anna sat once again in the courtroom, her fingers curled tightly around Charlie's leash, as if drawing strength from his unwavering presence. The tension in the room was sharper than ever, like a storm building just on the horizon. Robert sat at the defense table, his face pale and drawn. His usual air of arrogance had all but vanished, replaced by visible discomfort as the prosecutor laid out the new pieces of evidence. The cracks in his armor were spreading, and everyone in the room could sense it. The prosecutor began to speak, his tone confident yet methodical. He recounted Anna's testimony from the previous day, weaving it together with the journal entries she had submitted. Each word painted a vivid picture of the moments Anna had described. Those haunting family gatherings, the stolen glances, and the fear that had marked her childhood. The courtroom was silent, save for the occasional sound of scribbling from the jurors who were hanging on to every detail. Even the spectators leaned forward, their eyes fixed on Anna as though she were the epicenter of the unfolding drama. Charlie, as always, remained a steady presence beside her. His amber eyes stayed fixed on Robert, his posture alert but calm. Every now and then, he leaned slightly against Anna's leg, a quiet reminder that she wasn't facing this storm alone. It was as if the dog knew that his role extended far beyond being her protector. He was a symbol of her resilience, her courage, and her truth. Robert's defense attorney tried to counter the mounting evidence with questions designed to confuse and discredit Anna. "Ms. Collins," he said, his voice filled with feigned patience, "do you believe it's possible that your experiences as a child have influenced the way you perceive these events? Memory can be unreliable." His attempt at calm skepticism fell flat. His words met with quiet murmurs of disapproval from the gallery. Anna's gaze didn't falter. Her hands tightened slightly on Charlie's leash, and her reply came quickly. "No," Anna said firmly, her voice steady and clear. "I remember exactly what happened, and Charlie was there for all of it. He understands more than anyone realizes." Her words, simple yet powerful, seemed to reverberate through the room. Even the defense attorney hesitated, his strategy momentarily thrown off course. The jurors exchanged glances, their attention now shifting to Robert, who was visibly struggling to maintain his composure. His shoulders sagged, and the air around him seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. Then, the prosecutor revealed another piece of evidence. It was an audio recording, static-laden and imperfect but undeniable in its implications. As the tape played, the room froze. Anna's voice from years ago echoed faintly, recounting a moment that had previously been left unspoken. The sound was raw, filled with emotion, and it left the courtroom stunned. Charlie's ears perked slightly, his posture firm, as though sensing the seismic shift in the atmosphere. Robert's reaction was immediate. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sweat beading on his forehead. His carefully crafted facade crumbled further, the weight of the truth pressing down on him with relentless force. The prosecutor paused the tape, letting the silence stretch long enough for everyone in the room to absorb what they had just heard. It was clear to everyone now. The walls Robert had built around his lies were collapsing, and the truth was finally breaking through. Anna looked down at Charlie, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. She knew the road ahead was still filled with challenges, but with her loyal companion by her side, she felt a strength she hadn't known before. This was her moment, not just to tell her story, but to finally find justice. The courtroom was electric with tension as Anna sat silently, her hands resting on Charlie's leash. The atmosphere had shifted once again, growing heavier with each passing moment. All eyes were on the prosecutor as he approached the stand, a determined gleam in his eyes. The momentum was building, and Anna could sense that something pivotal was about to unfold. Beside her, Charlie remained alert, his calm demeanor acting as her anchor. The prosecutor turned to the judge, his voice steady but edged with urgency. "Your Honor, the next witness will provide clarity to the timeline of events." The crowd murmured in anticipation, and Anna's gaze flickered briefly toward her uncle, Robert. His once dignified posture had deteriorated further. He slouched in his chair, sweat dotting his forehead, his eyes darting nervously. The man who once loomed so large in her life now seemed small, cornered. The door at the back of the courtroom opened, and a new figure entered, a neighbor who had lived close to the Collins family for years. The witness took their seat, their testimony illuminating fragments of the past that Anna had long struggled to piece together. They spoke of odd behaviors, hushed arguments, and moments that, in hindsight, seemed like warnings ignored. Each word added weight to the already overwhelming evidence against Robert, like stones piling onto his crumbling defense. Throughout the testimony, Anna remained quiet, her focus split between the unfolding narrative and the steady presence of Charlie at her side. The jurors leaned closer, their interest growing with every new detail. Robert, however, was unraveling. His hands shook visibly, and his lawyer struggled to maintain composure as the cracks in their story widened. The silence between each question and answer seemed deafening, each pause amplifying the gravity of the witness's words. Then came a moment no one had anticipated. The prosecutor produced another piece of evidence, a handwritten letter from Robert himself, uncovered during the investigation. The letter, intended to be discarded, revealed a shocking admission of guilt wrapped in veiled language. As the prosecutor read aloud, gasps rippled through the room. Robert's face drained of all color, his mask of denial shattered by his own words. Anna's heart raced as she watched the scene unfold. This was the moment she had feared and hoped for in equal measure. A moment when the truth stood unyielding in the face of lies. She glanced at Charlie, his unwavering gaze locked on Robert, as if he, too, understood the significance of the revelation. For the first time in years, Anna felt the faint stirrings of hope that justice might finally prevail. The air in the courtroom was thick with anticipation as Robert's pale hands clutched the edges of the table in front of him. The letter, still lying on display, seemed to drain the last remnants of his denial. His attorney was frantically flipping through a stack of documents, searching for something, anything, to salvage what was left of their case. But the damage had been done, and everyone in the room could sense it. The weight of the truth was finally collapsing Robert's carefully constructed facade. Anna sat in the witness chair, her green eyes fixed firmly on the scene unfolding before her. She hadn't spoken since the letter's revelation, but she didn't need to. Her courage, her honesty, and her unwavering testimony had created the foundation for this moment. Charlie, as always, remained at her side, his ears alert and his gaze steady, as if silently watching over her. The jurors, who had been visibly conflicted at the trial's start, now exchanged subtle glances that suggested a shared understanding. Robert's guilt was undeniable. The prosecutor moved toward the jury, his steps deliberate and his voice calm but firm. He reminded them of every piece of evidence, weaving the facts together like strands of a thread tightening around Robert. From Anna's testimony to the witness accounts and the damning letter, the narrative left little room for doubt. The truth, he concluded, turning to face Robert, has been staring us in the face all along. Robert shifted in his chair, his eyes darting nervously across the room. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as if he might finally speak, as if some hidden sliver of remorse might surface. But the words never came. Instead, he slumped deeper into his seat, his silence loud enough to echo across the courtroom. The gallery watched with bated breath, murmurs rippling among the spectators. Charlie's ears twitched as the tension in the room peaked. He stood suddenly, moving forward just slightly, his posture direct and commanding. The subtle motion drew every eye in the room, and a ripple of awe swept through the gallery. Charlie seemed to lock his gaze onto Robert, his body language unyielding, a reflection of Anna's quiet strength. It was as though the dog himself was silently passing judgment. The defense attorney, now visibly shaken, attempted a weak rebuttal. His words were unconvincing, laced with desperation. The jurors remained impassive, their gazes flickering between Robert and Anna. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely. Where Robert once projected control, it was Anna who now embodied resilience, supported every step of the way by her loyal companion. The judge rapped her gavel, signaling a pause in proceedings. The courtroom erupted into whispers as Anna leaned down, stroking Charlie's head. She felt a wave of exhaustion but also a growing sense of determination. The walls around Robert's lies had crumbled, but the journey wasn't over yet. Anna glanced at the jury, hoping they saw the truth as clearly as she and Charlie did. As the trial resumed, the tension in the courtroom reached a fever pitch. Anna sat quietly in the witness chair, her hands resting firmly on Charlie's leash. Her resolve remained unshaken despite the emotional toll of the previous days. The gallery was packed, the quiet murmur of voices blending with the distant hum of fluorescent lights. Everyone knew that the case was nearing its turning point, and the atmosphere reflected the gravity of the moment. The prosecutor stood confidently, his voice cutting through the silence as he presented the final pieces of evidence. Photographs, journals, and audio recordings were laid out before the jury like pieces of a puzzle. One by one, he connected the dots, painting a picture so vivid and undeniable that even the most skeptical jurors could not look away. Every fragment pointed to the truth of Anna's story, the betrayal hidden within her own family. Anna's gaze drifted to Robert, who now seemed almost unrecognizable. The man who had once held so much power over her now appeared small and broken, slouched in his seat with his head bowed low. His defense attorney was still speaking, attempting to poke holes in the evidence with hollow arguments, but his words carried little weight. The walls of Robert's lies had crumbled entirely, and the room seemed to hold its breath as his silence stretched on. Charlie, ever vigilant, shifted slightly beside Anna. His ears twitched, his posture alert, and his amber eyes locked onto Robert with an intensity that drew the attention of several jurors. Though no words passed between them, it was clear that Charlie's presence spoke volumes. He was a reflection of Anna's bravery, a symbol of the truth that could no longer be ignored. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The prosecutor paused, his hand resting on the final piece of evidence, a signed confession, written by Robert himself but never meant to see the light of day. The confession, recovered during the investigation, was read aloud, the words carrying a weight that left the courtroom stunned. Gasps filled the air, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Anna felt her breath hitch as the reality of the moment settled over her. Years of silence and fear had led to this, the truth, finally laid bare for all to see. Robert slumped forward in his chair, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He muttered something incomprehensible, his voice breaking under the weight of his guilt. The defense attorney placed a hand on his shoulder, but even he seemed resigned to the inevitable. The judge rapped her gavel, calling for order as murmurs rippled through the gallery. Anna leaned down to Charlie, stroking his head gently. His calm presence reminded her of how far she had come and how much she had endured to reach this moment. As she sat up, her green eyes locked on the jury, silently urging them to see the truth as clearly as she did. The courtroom felt like a ticking clock, each second stretching into eternity as the jurors exchanged subtle glances. Anna sat motionless, her small frame upright in the witness chair. Her green eyes never wavered, locking onto each member of the jury as if silently pleading for justice. Beside her, Charlie stood alert, his posture mirroring Anna's resilience and resolve. The room was still, the weight of everything that had unfolded hanging heavy in the air. Robert sat slumped at the defense table, his once arrogant demeanor now a distant memory. His lawyer whispered frantically in his ear, though it was clear no amount of strategy could reverse what had already been revealed. The damning evidence, the confession, the journal, the testimonies. All of it had painted a portrait of guilt so vivid it could not be ignored. For Robert, the walls were closing in, and the silent judgment of the jury was deafening. The prosecutor delivered his closing arguments with measured precision. His voice, steady yet impassioned, recounted every step of the trial, every piece of evidence, and every word of Anna's brave testimony. This case, he concluded, turning toward the jury, is about courage and truth triumphing over fear and lies. Anna Collins stood up not just for herself, but for justice. And as her loyal companion Charlie has shown us, truth has a way of making itself heard, even in silence. The gallery sat in hushed silence, the weight of the prosecutor's words sinking in. Charlie let out a low, almost imperceptible whine, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Anna reached down to place a hand on his head, the familiar gesture grounding her as she braced herself for what was to come. She knew the jury's decision would soon determine not just Robert's fate, but her ability to finally find peace. The defense attorney rose, his movements slow, almost hesitant. His closing argument lacked the sharpness it once held. He struggled to sow doubt where none could grow, his words ringing hollow in the face of overwhelming evidence. As he spoke, Robert's face betrayed the depth of his despair. His head bowed, his shoulders sagged, and his hands trembled slightly. He knew the inevitable was near. When the judge adjourned the courtroom for the jury's deliberation, a collective exhale swept through the room. The gallery buzzed softly with whispers as people debated what would happen next. Anna sat back in her chair, her hands still resting on Charlie, who pressed closer to her side. She felt a swirl of emotions: fear, hope, exhaustion. But most of all, she felt the quiet strength of finally standing up for herself. Her truth had been spoken, and now it was in the hands of the jury. As the courtroom emptied for the deliberation, Anna turned her gaze toward Charlie. His amber eyes met hers, steady and filled with an understanding that needed no words. Whatever the verdict, she knew she had done everything she could. And with Charlie by her side, she knew she could face whatever lay ahead. The courtroom was silent as the jury filed back into their seats, their expressions unreadable. Anna sat in the witness chair, her hands trembling slightly despite her best efforts to stay calm. Charlie sat beside her, his amber eyes fixed on the jurors as though he could sense the importance of the moment. The judge, her expression as composed as ever, turned to the jury foreperson. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor," the foreperson replied, their voice steady but low. The room seemed to collectively hold its breath as the foreperson unfolded the small piece of paper. Every eye in the gallery was on them, and the tension was so thick it felt like the walls themselves were pressing inward. Anna's heart pounded as the foreperson began to speak. "In the case of Robert Collins," they paused, glancing at the paper before continuing, "we find the defendant guilty on all counts." The words seemed to hang in the air, suspended for a moment before the courtroom erupted into gasps and murmurs. Relief surged through Anna like a wave, her shoulders sagging under the weight of the burden she had carried for so long. She looked down at Charlie, who wagged his tail slightly, his calm presence a reflection of her quiet triumph. Robert sat motionless, his face pale and hollow. His hands, once fidgeting nervously, now lay limp on the table in front of him. The verdict had shattered the last remnants of his denial, leaving him a shell of the man who had once loomed so large in Anna's life. His lawyer placed a hand on his arm, whispering something that Robert didn't appear to hear. He stared straight ahead, his gaze empty. The judge's gavel struck sharply, calling for silence as she delivered the sentencing. Her words were firm, decisive, and final. Justice had been served, and Anna knew the chapter that had haunted her for so long was finally closing. Tears welled in her eyes, not just from relief, but from the realization that she could now begin to heal. As the courtroom emptied, spectators murmuring quietly as they left, Anna stayed seated, her hand resting on Charlie's head. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with the same quiet understanding he had always offered. She bent down and whispered softly, "We did it, Charlie." The dog leaned into her, his tail wagging gently as if acknowledging her words. Walking out of the courtroom, Anna felt the sunlight hit her face, warm and soothing after the cold confines of the trial. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the fresh air she hadn't realized she'd been longing for. Charlie walked closely beside her, his steps steady and confident. For the first time in years, the weight that had pressed so heavily on her chest was gone. She was free, not just from the shadows of her past, but free to dream, to move forward, to live. As she walked down the courthouse steps, she glanced down at Charlie, a small smile forming on her lips. "Let's go home," she said softly, and together, they stepped into the next chapter of their lives, one built on truth, courage, and the unbreakable bond they had forged.